So what's the future? This first point it was touched on. We do believe that food security, including prices, is at or close to the top of government's agenda worldwide. You heard again from the Secretary of State that it is the top item on the agenda of the G20, which happens in the next month or so. That would simply have not been heard of 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. It's very, very important. Now, that does not mean to say that governments globally have yet come up with a coherent response, but it is higher on the agenda than it's been for a long, long time. There's good news and bad news about that. The good news is that we believe that we will see increased investment in infrastructure. We will see increased R&D investment to improve the yields, a second green revolution, if you like. We are encouraged that so far Russia is one of the few governments that has imposed an export ban. In 2008, there were many, many governments around the world did that. There's a realization that that type of action, in the short term, it may help your domestic audience, but in the long term, it's counterproductive. So we think that there will be a stronger commitment to a rules-based open trading system. Regulation. There is a good news story and a bad news story about regulation. We heard that here that there is a task force led not by an academic, not that there's anything wrong with academics, to try and look at this. But the problem is that governments worldwide have spent many, many years trying to make the decision of Solomon. You know the Solomon story. You take the baby, the two women claim it, so Solomon says, well, I'll cut it in half. What governments worldwide have tried to do is to pick a price that they think is fair between the urban poor, who have a habit of going out and rioting, and the rural farm community. It's a very, very difficult decision to make. Frequently, they've got it wrong. Usually, the urban poor trump the rural farm community in many communities because they have this tendency to go and riot. And therefore, governments worldwide, what they've done is they've tended to fix prices so that the signals of what the marketplace needs in terms of increased production simply don't get through to farmers in many parts of the world. One of the businesses that we're heavily involved in is the cocoa business, so I can talk about that. It's neutral. It's not relevant to the UK. And so in the Ivory Coast, which is undergoing a lot of turmoil at the moment, the government has consistently taxed the export of that product to a level that farmers get no incentive to look after their crop. So companies like ours have to go and set up co-ops working with farmers to improve the productivity, the yield, and the quality of the product. And so you have, I can give you many more examples of, again, government intervention, if it's trying to set prices and hold them down for the urban poor, can be very counterproductive to productivity. A fight for dirt, lovely Midwest American expression. As you may get, I did come last weekend from there, but I am not from those parts. Our company is headquartered in Minnesota, and I'll tell you a story. I was at a meeting there last Sunday, finished the meeting. I had to drive around a lake about 15 miles to get to the little apartment that I have. But as there was 3 feet of ice, I drove 7 miles straight across the lake. And it was like a highway, very interesting. It was minus 24 degrees centigrade. I digress. What you have is a situation today where there is tightness in almost all crops. That means that there is this fight for dirt. So you cannot have a situation where one commodity is priced out of sync with the others. The danger in a fight for dirt, as you all know, particularly those of you who are tenant farmers, that ultimately that gets translated into rent. But higher rents is a mechanism where capital can flow into the industry. And then a point I stressed on the previous slide is that volatility is here to stay. So those of you who hark back to a time period where intervention was the norm and prices barely moved. That is the past. Volatility is here to stay. So what are some of the impacts on farmers? You know this. It's about markets, it's about markets, it's about markets. Figuring out your game plan, staying flexible, understanding that the volatility is here today and that you have to spend as much time looking at markets as planning your crops is just part of life being a farmer today. The other thing, not so much in this country, but in many countries, being careful who you do business with, because the volatility is such that you do have people who will disappear. We see this time and again, not so much in Europe, but in other parts of the world, where with this volatility, people prefer to do business with a company who's been around for a long time and very much operates on the word is our bond philosophy. The right time to sell vastly outweighs the best price on day X. Again, this is about markets. It's about understanding the trends. It's about picking the right time to sell rather than trying to squeeze 25p on a particular day. And then in order to produce this 40% more food in the next 20 years, how do we balance the paradox of the need for intensification with sustainability? We believe as a company that embracing technology is part of that. We do not produce GM products. We don't research in GM products, but we think they are one of the tools in the toolbox that have a role to play, particularly in a water-stressed environment, to help provide that additional food for the world. And so what is our role as a company? Cargill was founded 146 years ago at the end of the railway in a little place called Conway, Iowa. So it was the first stage to a local farm merchant collection service right at the end of the American Civil War. Today we're a global company, and I like this. This is my favorite slide. I use it a lot because essentially it shows the role that we play. The Western Hemisphere, particularly North and South America, is a major surplus producer. The Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union, was deficit, is increasingly moving to a surplus, and you see Western Europe more or less balanced with the large growing young populations of Asia and the Middle East and Africa increasingly deficit. Egypt, for example, is the fourth largest importer of grain in the world. And our role is to have the balanced footprint globally so that we can move those surpluses to those areas of deficit in the most efficient way possible. Our goal is to be able to pay a little bit more to the farmer in those surplus areas and sell to the consumer in those deficit areas a little bit cheaper than the next guy. And that means we have to be more efficient. We talk about investment. I mentioned that public sector investment in agriculture in terms of hard and soft infrastructure had been on decline for the last 20 years. Companies like Cargill and others continue to invest in their global footprint. So Cargill's half-yearly results through November came out recently. I noticed some of our competitors' results have also come out recently, and they stress the same story. We continue to invest in good times and bad. Cargill's a private company. We're lucky to have two families who own the company, and they allow us to reinvest over 80% of the cash flow back into the business in good times and bad, investing in those assets that can help serve the farm community and consumers. The other thing we do is we pull in a huge amount of information from worldwide. I don't believe we have any better information than our competitors, by and large. We're not that smart. What we do is pull it together, assimilate, assess, and form a point of view. And increasingly what we need to be doing is working with farmers to help you understand that point of view and anticipate these issues. Because in this volatile world that I've described, trying to do that is essential for the health of your business going forward. So with that, I'd like to finish. I am ready to answer pre-prepared or other questions. And as I said, I do not know where the price of wheat or rapeseed is going, but I'm sure many of you would welcome £400 and £800. Thanks very much.